Hey, they were talking about farm policy, the farm bill, whether or not we're going to get one, farm incomes, and a whole bunch of other stuff coming out of Washington, D.C. with my guest, Jim Wiesemeyer. Hey, Damian Mason here with a question before we hop into this episode of the Business of Agriculture. If you farm for a living, you employ a lot of amazing technology, from your inputs that you put into the soil to the tractor that you sit in, your combine, and the amazing data that it harvests. But has your soil analytics kept up technologically with everything else in your farming operation? I would venture to say that no, it is not. Sure, you check for your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium, your micronutrients as well. But what about disease pressure? Do you know what diseases and what pests you're going to face next year? No, you don't. But you can now figure that out with Pattern Ag's predictive analytics. Think about it. They can tell you now with testing what the likelihood of facing nasty diseases, things like cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome, what the likelihood of you having this in your field, then you know how to prepare, how to treat, and where to invest your money. It's using technology to make you bigger yields and therefore make you bigger money. Go to www.pattern.ag to learn more. They are pioneering the way in predictive agronomy. Hey, welcome to another fantastic episode of the Business of Agriculture. We got Jim Wiesemeyer. He is the policy analyst for Pro Farmer and Farm Journal. He's been on this show before at least a couple of times. He's awesome when he gets on here. We just finally had to hit the record button because before we started, we had so many things we were talking about. I love bumping into Jim Wiesemeyer. We run into each other at speaking engagements around North America, going way back to when I was a political comedian. So he knew me back when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, or he knew me back when I used to dress up as Bill Clinton.
Yes.
He's coming to me from a room in Fargo because even at age 75, he's still bumping the road and going to places like I do and in the hinterlands during wintertime. So we're recording this the second week of February, and bear in mind, these are all point-in-time things. We don't know what policy might be coming out if you're listening to this in May, June, July, but the point is, here's where we are right now. Or as he just said, it's what's not happening in Washington, D.C. Big picture here is farm income, and then in your publication, Pro Farmer, your one of your employers, they had a big thing about, is this going to impact USDA policy and the farm bill? So kind of just get going on that, then we'll get to farm income and whether or not there's going to be a farm bill, et cetera.
Sure. Well, on the farm income side, USDA this week, it was the first forecast of 2024 farm income, and they showed it down $40 billion from 2023. Now, that's on top of the down $26 billion, 2023 from 2022.
So high watermark, just because a lot of people don't realize how good things have been. 21, 22, and 23 was the three highest net farm income, United States net farm income numbers in the history of keeping these records, which is quite some time. And that's in both nominal and real dollars, meaning even adjusting for inflation. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. So our high watermark was 2022. Not that 21 was bad. 22, we hit 168 billion, right?
Yes.
We took a little drag, 26 billion down last year at 23, but that still was a very good number. The first projections came out this week saying we're going to be down another 40. We're going to be hovering around 101, 102 billion is the projection right now for this year. That could be a problem. That's down.
Well, it's an early projection, and they frequently change it. However, look at the cash receipts forecast for corn and soybeans. They show a dramatic decline. So that's where it's going to be felt. Your input costs are not going down nearly as much as prices are. So that's a key. So those of us who've been in the industry a while, you're getting into the early throes of a cost price squeeze. And that tells me when you look at USDA's numbers, farmers are dipping into working capital to pay the bills. And it's a cautionary flag. Yeah, as you said, Damian, we've had some pretty good years here. So they built up some reserves. But when you start dipping into working capital, it's a cautionary flag, yellow light, not a red light, yellow light.
So a lot of people, and yeah, I've got the numbers here. This is perfect. This came across my desk in my email from Pro Farmer, who you work for, and I had these numbers, and this is the first I had seen. I knew that we were projected to be down. I didn't have a quantitative figure at $40 billion. And again, $40 billion, first off, it's a big number. But secondly, I think it's always important to put it in perspective. I can't get my hands around 40 billion. I can't get my hands around 1 billion, right? But what the main thing is, coming down 40 from 142, which is what I think we were last year. Okay, you're talking about that's about 35% hit, 30% hit. Yeah. If your income goes down 30%, if your job gave you a 30% deduct in what you can't generally save, you can't scrimp back enough to cover that. I think that's what I think we're really talking about, Jim. Like if all of a sudden your income went down 30%, it's unlikely that you can just say, okay, we're going to clip some coupons and we're not going to eat out as much. All of a sudden, and that's where the working capital comes in. So for the person that's not as economically minded, tell them the working capital, because I have all kinds of different listeners here and we're not insulting to anybody. What's working capital mean in...
Well, that's where you have to pay the bills, non-postponable costs, the stuff you have to pay no matter what. Your fertilizer prices, energy prices. If you don't loan your land prices usually in February or March at the latest, and they're ticking higher. Interest, financing.
Sure. So the working capital
interest rates at what, 8 or 9% in foreign countries. So yeah, the key here, Damian, is a lot of agribusiness companies price their products off of farm income. So those 3 years you indicated, they really went up on the price of their products, equipment, fertilizer, et cetera. And they typically don't come down. If they come down, they don't come down much at all. There again is your squeeze.
Yeah, they always talk about, and this is everything from the grocery store, which we are all experiencing as consumers, to whether you're buying new technology for your farm or, like you said, crop inputs. They talk about the stickiness. Gold or commodities on the trade have more fluctuation generally than toilet paper or Campbell's soup. The point is, once they make an adjustment upward, they're generally sticky enough they don't come down. Well, it's the same thing for crop inputs, be they biologicals. Fertilizer is more like a true commodity, but the branded products or even the generic products, they tend to have a stickiness. Once they go up, they don't come down, right?
Absolutely. And that's why it's an insult to most consumers when the administration says that food inflation is coming down. Yes, the rate of the increase is coming down, but the nominal price of the food products that went up 35%, they're not coming down.
Yeah, I read that, and I always think I feel bad for some of the consumers that they don't do the economics and whatnot. They hear from the media, from the DC, food inflation is coming down. Again, the rate of price growth is slowing. It doesn't mean what you pay is coming down. And that's, as you said, and that's where we're going to get with the farm inputs. If I'm a farm operator, I still got to put in, I need my seed, I need my feed, I need all those things that make me a living. And so then we talk working capital. So I asked you about layman's terms what working capital is. What it means is you still got to have the stuff. And if you're spread on what your expected revenue is, in other words, if your revenue doesn't cover it, if your revenue covers your exact cost, then you're at break even. When your revenue is not enough to pay for your input costs, you eat into working capital. So I guess that's what I think for somebody that's maybe in the cranberry processing business, listen to this, like, why do I care about working capital? So tell them why that matters, because there's a segment
absolutely.
Here
and even for a livestock producer, the feed prices, it looks to be coming down with corn prices showing signs of a bear market and soybeans holding rather steady, but that's another component. Now, if you don't have the reserves in your bank, Damian, of course, that's where your banker becomes important, because it's a thing called cash flow. So They have to borrow more money. They're borrowing more money at higher interest rates than they've seen the past few years. So again, I hate to be a font of negative news here, but that's the current situation. 2025 interest rates will be lower, but not this year.
So in 2024, we're going to eat into working capital, which means money saved or equity in land, net worth. It could be grain. That's another thing. The farmers like to look at grain as a bank. That's not necessarily how they should look at it, I don't think, but that's a different story. We're talking about there's going to be a digging into the rainy day fund, and that rainy day fund may not be cash in a piggy bank, but it's those things that you hold, equity, right?
Yes. And we've seen historically in some years that farmers have been more willing to sell some parcels of ground if they own it. So that's an option, but you have to own the land.
Yeah, right.
I think we'll see some of that. So if that's the case, depending on the volume of land being sold for just for equity purposes, you could have a tempering pause on these land values and also cash rents.
Oh my goodness!
Another thing.
Right into, you took us right into a direction we weren't even going to get to just yet. Oh, the guy's amazing. That's why he's on here. All right, we're going to talk about that, which, by the way, ties into the episode I just released. I just released an episode all about cash rents and land values, and now you're going to come up on that. So we'll get into that, but we're going to talk about the farm income and what that means for everybody. Before we do, hey, if you're watching this show versus just listening to it, I'm wearing my Redox hat. Redox is my new sponsor coming on 2024. They are a bionutrients company. I know you've heard about biologicals. They're a dime a dozen. A bunch of venture capital money is poured into the whole biological space. 1,200 different companies are in the biological space. The reason Redox is the sponsor for this show is because they're not some fly-by-night venture capital-backed bugs in a jug company. They've been around for 30 years. Darren Moon began this company 30 years ago. They've got a background in ag, specialty crop, and turf. That's right. They've been around for 30 years. Redox Bionutrients produces products that actually have a success and a track record. Been doing it for 30 years, providing superior nutrition, abiotic stress defense, root growth, soil health, and efficient nutrient uptake. You can find out more at redoxgrows.com. Check out the Redox Grows podcast. They had me on as a guest a month or two ago. Check it out, redoxgrows.com. Okay, so you went right down the road of what this means. It might be a little premature, Jim, to say that there's going to be land sales and declines. Those tend to be a little sticky also.
Yes.
So in 2024, I wouldn't see, and I don't know what's your opinion, I wouldn't see a bunch of running for the exit, screaming fire in ag yet, because won't it get to where we see some adjusting on farm, we're skinnying here, we're digging into what our borrowing base is. But maybe the base isn't there. Maybe the piggy bank isn't there. Maybe you're closer to this than I am.
I just think if you see it anywhere, it won't be actually land values. It could be cash rents that's held up very well. But I think there's some give in the cash rents because farmers' number won't be able to make it flow. So there'll have to be a little give, and
so there'll be a little haggling.
Yes, and all this that we're talking about, Damian, is a signal to Congress, farm state lawmakers, to get a farm bill done because of the Title I safety net. It's very inefficient right now. It is not going to help in these looks to 1 to maybe 2 years, hopefully only, of a downturn in some major commodity prices. I hope I'm wrong, but that's what it looks like right now. That's why you need a farm bill this year. But you talk to almost anybody in Washington, they give very low odds that a farm bill will be done this calendar year for political purposes.
So dig this. It was supposed to come out, and to refresh our listeners, every 5 years, 2018, and then 2023 was supposed to be a farm bill. It's the only thing in D.C. that somehow is a legislation that gets redone every 5 years that's this significant. It didn't happen in 23. You're telling me it's not going to happen in 2024. So we're going to stick with whatever the policy was done in 2018.
It looks like it. Yeah, it's not necessarily 5 years. There's been 3, 4, 5 years, et cetera. That's why in my speeches, Damian, I never put a year on a farm bill. Okay. Because of what we've seen. They extended it last year through September of this year. But, we've had 19 farm bills in the history of our great country. I will have covered 11 of them.
First one was 1940s, wasn't it?
No, in the 30s.
30s. We had,
absolutely.
Under FDR, I know the Agricultural Adjustment Act and some of that stuff, and a lot of I'm into ag history. Yeah, during Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So answer me this: does it matter? Does the Farm Bill? Does it matter? I mean, we know we got some declining farm revenue. That's pretty much about a given. If it's 40, if it's 37, if it's 42. I don't think that the number is too far off. I mean, the USDA's predictions and projections haven't been ridiculously off in the past. So let's just call it, a fairly valid number. We got that, but what difference does the Farm Bill make on the farm income, other than you're thinking that we need a Farm Bill to toss more subsidy?
It does. Incentives, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It means something. You should have a farm bill. Reason? Although the crop insurance program will handle a lot of situations, and that's what's different between the 1980s, where we had literally a depression in agriculture. It's like wet cement on my forehead. Yeah. Today, crop insurance, their revenue assurance programs, et cetera, are far better able to avoid a catastrophe. However, a crop insurance program cannot deal with consecutive years of very low prices. That's where the Title I of the Farm Bill comes in. The problem is that the reference prices, they used to be called target prices, in the Title I program are way too low for all the reasons that we've already discussed. With farmers need a lot of higher prices now just to break even. So there is the biggest issue in the Farm Bill right now. The Republicans want to increase the target prices, but it's costly and it's not built into the baseline. Real quick, a 10% increase in reference prices cost $20 billion additional. A 20% increase costs $50 billion, and they're trying to find those funds.
Okay, so you're saying, and this is for because crop, is this part of the crop insurance? Because I'm not a policy person. That's why you're on here. This is more of the government policy on what?
Price, safety net. The safety net on the price. Now, crop insurance is a portion of that, but not totally. They'll do the yield insurance, but they'll also have price assurance. So they complement each other, but they don't replace each other, Damian. As I said, any crop insurance cannot deal with, say, 3 straight years of very low prices. It's not built to do that. Okay. And this is why Senate Ag Chairwoman Debbie Stabenow, Democrat from Michigan, she's thrown out a bombshell when she wants to offer farmers a choice between the existing farm programs, the ARC and the PLC program, Title I programs, but not in addition to, or a souped-up crop insurance program for what she called the area-wide program, their FCO and ECO. I don't want to get too wonky for you, but that would be a fundamental change. It's not going to happen. There's not overall support for that. But boy, that was a surprise when she came out with that choice.
Okay, so not getting too wonky. The point is that a lot of people listening to this maybe aren't as familiar. You can, and this is something that my farm friends don't like it when I point this out, but I said, if I own the dry cleaners here in town and I can't get a policy that will insure me to have revenue, as a farmer, I can buy insurance subsidized by the USDA that will guarantee me revenue. So that's good. I mean, that way, because you've got millions of dollars of assets deployed, and also it keeps the point of it, the whole policy, as you and I both know, because you're in DC, you're 20 years older than me, is to assure stability, right? And so we want a viable food supply, right?
There you said it. Crop insurance is food security in a tight fit. That's your soundbite. That's why there's bipartisan support for crop insurance. It's the best risk management tool I've seen in my 53-year career watching Washington.
So what you're talking about, it's one thing to say we're going to guarantee that you get a crop or you don't go broke if you have a drought, derecho, tornado, hurricane, whatever. But you're talking about then the policy of making sure that these farm operations have adequate revenue to at least stay up. And that goes beyond crop insurance. So you think that there will be a push in DC, or you're hoping, to supplement the farm bill with new, shall we say, guarantees of revenue going to the farms?
Well, higher reference prices, yes. And if they don't, no, they'll kick the can down the road and you'll have a bill in 2025. Because the ranking member on the Senate Ag Committee, opposite Stabenow, is John Bozeman, Republican from Arkansas. He put a red line in the sand saying, hey, we got to have an increase in reference prices. Of course, his rice growers in his state were really hurting, and they need an increase. Peanuts needs an increase. Now, but if he doesn't get it, he thinks that, okay, if you want to put leverage on me, I think the Republicans are going to win the Senate November 5th.
Right.
So I'm going to be Senate Ag Committee chairman in the new Congress. So that's I think, probably what he's thinking. You give it to me now or you give it to me later, but it's coming.
So if he doesn't get it, then are you thinking that the farms are going to be left to just take it in the shorts in terms of, in other words, what is your real prediction besides some of the things about, rents or some haggling, negotiating on some inputs, those kinds of things? Are we going to really see a situation where, or what's happened usually is that somehow there's an emergency installment of cash that comes out and gets tossed at the farm bill, and you're not thinking.
Well, that may not be even in the farm bill. If there's an emergency situation, then you look to your annual appropriations bills, the fiscal year appropriation. I've called them mini farm bills, so that's why I tell farmers, just don't think that if you don't get a 5-year farm bill that it's done, because if these prices crash, and let's determine, if corn futures go under $4 and if soybean futures go under $11, let that be your markers, then you're going to see pain. You're going to see pain. That's where the pressure comes into farm state lawmakers. And if they can't get an omnibus farm bill done, then they'll look to the annual appropriations bill that they're behind on now anyway. But
Right.
that's where you could get a shot of infusion for cash needs.
Okay, so that's what I was wondering, because that's always separate from actual U.S. It's not even a USDA budgetary item, right?
But what is?
Like when all of a sudden, I think they did it in 2019 or 20. Some of it was the tariff thing. Some of it was, it was just an adjustment, and they blew out, I don't know, like $20 billion or something, and said
$23 billion. $23 billion. But that was President Trump, and that's where it was a U.S.-China trade war. So, yeah, they tapped what we call the Commodity Credit Corporation Charter Act, CCC, at USDA. Well, Trump, once he learned that he could tap what I call the ATM machine at USDA,
Right.
That's authorized for $30 billion, and it's replenished usually at the end of each calendar year.
Right.
Secretary Vilsack saw what Trump did, and he also tapped it, but for different purposes. He tapped it for over $3 billion for climate change programs.
Yeah.
So, they can tap that administratively if they want to, or Congress can dictate that USDA tap the Commodity Credit Corporation for such funds as necessary to make farmers not necessarily whole, but to avoid a real bad downturn.
Well, that's my point, and this is where I'm not being a negative Nancy. I'm also not being a suck it up buttercup type. But I'm gonna be real straight here. It seems that all this hand-wringing right now, yeah, we're looking at some low numbers. We're looking at a decline. Well, holy crap. You and I just said before we hit the record button, 2005 to 2013 is as good an ag as it's ever been. Those of us that came up through the 80s, and I don't carry on, young people are like, oh, he's doing ag. No, 05 to 2013 was amazing. 2014 through 2018 got a little skinny, 5 years. But by 2019 and 2020, Trump was throwing money out there, calling it tariff relief. There was another one. One of those years, might have been $51 billion of farm income was derived from federal means, aids, whatever you will. So I don't know that all this hand-wringing is completely necessary, because generally what has happened in more modern times, in the last 20 years, let's say, is if it looks like a shortfall, then we tap the CCC, as you said.
But if there's enough money, because the key here, Damian, is this the beginning of a multi-year downturn? That's where it would hurt, because while you can survive, most, not all, can survive a 1-year downturn.
Yeah.
If you get into a second-year downturn, watch out. And I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but I will be. Coming up in the elections here, November 5th, you have, if President Trump wins, look at trade policy. He's already saying that he'll invoke 60%, at least 60% tariffs on all China's products.
Right.
Then you're talking another U.S.-China trade war. On top of that,
and by the way, for point of reference, when that happened last time, Jim, what did the Chinese Communist Party specifically target was the one thing that they buy a lot of, which is ag, soybeans and pork in particular.
Soybeans and pork, yes, absolutely.
A little bit of corn, maybe.
And sorghum for their beer, biju, in beer in China.
Which, by the way, I think the beer must suck. I've never drank Chinese beer. I've never drank beer in China.
Good.
But You're like the third
It's
person I've had
actually
on the
good.
show that talks about using American grain sorghum to make beer. I'm like, how shitty is their beer? It has to be terrible.
No, that's why it's good, because it uses U.S. sorghum.
Well, that part's good, but who's ever had a grain sorghum beer? You know what? Somebody that's in the grain sorghum business is listening.
I'm an expert on China. I've been there twice, but
Yeah.
but I've had beer throughout their country. No, it's good, and I drank it once I knew that it had sorghum. But let me go on from.
I just want to point out real quickly, Jim, to this. I've had grain sorghum people on this show. I'm not anti-sorghum. If you've got a 6-pack of sorghum-based beer hanging around and you want to ship it to me, you know I'll drink it. I love beer. I just have never had a grain sorghum beer or a Chinese beer. Okay,
yeah.
So if that happens,
I'm going to add one thing on Trump. In addition to the China threat, the 60% tariffs, he's also saying that he's going to invoke at least 10% tariffs across the board on all exporting countries. Now, if you want a U.S. recession in agriculture, that's the way to do it.
Yeah, meaning because the one thing that we sell, we don't make a lot of crap. We don't make TVs in the United States and sell them overseas. It's the other direction. But the one thing we make the heck out of is agricultural products and sell it overseas. So if that happens, that would not to be until 2025 anyhow.
Yeah, it'll be 2025. But if Trump gets in on the futures market, that's the role of the futures market. If Trump were to get in, they would price that in pretty quickly, by the way. Mm-hmm. So we'll have to see if Trump and Lighthizer will probably come back, Bob Lighthizer, as his U.S. trade representative or as his chief of staff. Now, I'm an equal opportunity finger pointer when it comes to political parties. On the Democratic side, their trade policy is abysmal for agriculture. They're just following really the Trump trade policy with higher tariffs, getting at China, not focusing on new trade agreements because they want to help the manufacturing sector, et cetera. So at the time where we're going into what appears to be increased carryovers in the year ahead, especially for corn, you got to get rid of the stuff. The same thing with, we talked before we came on the air, Damian, on pork. Mm-hmm. You've got the lowest pork prices in many years, and we've had a trade problem getting U.S. pork exported because of China's got more hog production than usual. Japan's importing less. So that all equals your trade policy that the market is yelling out at Washington. You better improve your trade policy.
So here's the thing about the trade reality, though. And I'm going to be covering this in quite a bit, that it could just be that the world has all the supply that it needs. You know, I'm hearing about the carryovers on the big three: wheat, corn, soybeans, whatever, particularly corn, it looks like, or soybeans. But, you know, people can only eat so much. I mean, we got this reality that we had 3 really good years, and so we produced the heck out of stuff. Well, so did other countries, the exception of Europe, where they've got environmentalists shutting down farming, or in Ukraine and Russia, where they've got wars going on. But Brazil's still just raging forward, and Argentina and the United States, et cetera. So this could be the new reality, not just for 2024. This could be our reality for the next decade.
Well, I don't know whether I'd go that far. I hope not. But in the case of pork, you look at the alternative meats. We've got cattle prices, the lowest number of cattle in 73 years, but the demand is not proving to be deficient, and even at restaurants, you know. So I think it's a combination of things in the hog sector. The numbers are down there too. But I think it's worldwide production, as you said. You're putting your finger on it. And so they have to flush out a lot of potential producers, it looks like, regretfully.
I want to talk to you a little bit more about some policy specific. I got kind of some bullet points I want to hit on your thoughts on policy. Before I do that, I want to talk to you about Truterra, dear listeners. Truterra is one of my sponsors here. They are focused on supporting farmers at every stage of the sustainability journey. You know what? Don't get worried. I know when sustainability is mentioned, your bullshit meter goes up. So does mine. We've been hearing it for a long time. But the good thing is we in agriculture can reclaim the word and redefine the word sustainability. You know, things like cover crops, reduced tillage, reducing passes across the field, using less diesel fuel. These are kind of things that are actually good for your farm, good for your financials, good for your numbers. If we're talking about downturn in the economy, why not figure out a way to make money off those acres beyond just your crops? You can do that if you sign up through Truterra. The point is you might get paid for changing some practices. Couldn't you use an extra 25, 30, 40 bucks an acre? Could be your margin. Go to TruterraAg.com and find out more about incorporating sustainability for agronomic and economic improvements on your farming operation. Okay, about policy. I get the whole trade, et cetera, and we love talking about trade. I think eventually, I've been saying this to my ag audience for a long time, eventually we run out of places to ship barges to. I mean, we've been doing it for a long time. Our trade isn't down. We're not in this depressed commodity price thing just because nobody wants to buy America's stuff. The whole world has lots of supply, and I don't know what policy can change that.
Well, let me do a couple things on there. Our U.S. ag trade used to have a surplus for years. We're going to have three out of the last 4 years, we're going to have an ag trade deficit. Again, I think that echoes poor trade policy. I also want to pick up on what you said. If it does look like we've reached a short-term only plateau in some of these exports, in the case of, I know, corn and soybeans, you got to look for other areas. And that's where domestic policy, energy policy, is going to come into play potentially big time relative to not only the renewable fuel standard program, I think that's topped out, but it's the biofuels, renewable diesel in the case of soybeans, dramatic growth. And in the case of soybeans and hopefully corn as well, if it qualifies, sustainable aviation fuel for the years ahead. So that gives it more domestic utilization in the carbon mitigation program. And hopefully that'll continue no matter who wins the presidency November the 5th, that the biofuels program continues.
So you and I were just both at the top producers conference in Kansas City this week. Pete Meyer, who's been on this show, his wheelhouse is the renewable fuels thing. And he and I are friends and whatnot, as friendly as he can be. He's kind of cantankerous. But anyway, and he had a panel that I listened to with U.S. Farm Report, and they spoke about the renewable fuels. Here's the thing. I'm pro biofuels. That's great. It's good for my farmland values. There's 3 ethanol plants within 30 miles of my farm. What we're really doing, though, with this whole push for renewable diesel, I think, is just replacing demand that went to China. In other words, I don't think that's going to be 18 million new acres of soybeans. I think it's going to be 18 million acres that used to go somewhere else. And so that's where you talk about the policy part of it. The only reason renewable diesel makes sense, just same as ethanol, is because of the heavy hand of government or tax incentives. What's it called? CZ45, this new tax policy about carbon intensity. That's the policy you're talking about. It seems to be already in place, isn't it? And am I right? It's going to replace demand that used to go overseas.
Well, some of it is, but I think it will be above and beyond myself as you continue to grow, because when you look at the airlines and their professed need for a carbon offset, airlines, they've identified sustainable aviation fuel. And I'll tell you, the numbers eventually, Damian, get pretty large. And so I would, this would make it far more domestic utilization as opposed to having to rely on exports. So, but it's going to take time. Yeah. Now, coming this March, the Treasury Department is going to announce a final ruling on whether corn-based ethanol qualifies as a sustainable aviation fuel stock. That's going to be a major announcement.
Say that again. Coming this fall. Who's
coming this March this year? The Treasury Department is going to announce whether corn-based ethanol qualifies as a feedstock. If it doesn't, oh my goodness, your corn market is going to go down significantly.
And that's a feedstock for sustainable aviation fuel?
Yeah, to like soybean oil. Canola oil is already qualified. So if corn qualifies, then because you're going to need a combination of a lot of oils, corn-based oil, soybean oil, et cetera. We're already crushing. At the end of last September, the soybeans we crushed were 50% for soybean oil. Mm-hmm. There's the mega change that could be going on. If the sustainable aviation fuel growth continues, the mega changes we're going to crush for soybean oil not meal like we usually do. There's your fundamental change. And it's going to lead to more competition for corn and soybean acres and canola acres in the years ahead. So I would watch. I can't predict it totally, but the possibility is there for a major change. It could be equivalent to the renewable fuel standard program's early years for corn. It could have that much impact.
Which was 20 years ago. I mean, we propped up demand for corn starting 20 years ago in 2004 with renewable fuel standard. So here's the thing, Jim. I said we're going to talk about policy. You're the DC guy. You're the policy analyst, pro-farmer, Farm Journal. You just said that one of the major policies that's going to impact demand for our products is getting ethanol approved as a feedstock to make sustainable aviation fuel. This sustainable aviation fuel thing, I guess, is way more advanced in Europe. The European airlines are using more of it. We're talking about, Pete Meyer talked at length about like United Airlines. So the woman from Southwest Airlines was on the stage at the event in Kansas City. That's not policy that we can impact. It's not a USDA policy. So how the hell do we make sure that ethanol gets allegedly approved next month for sustainable aviation fuel?
Well, USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack, thankfully, has encouraged the Treasury Department to make corn-based ethanol qualify by using the right model. I hate to get too wonky on you. It's called the GREET model. And there's some nuances there, but if they use that ups the odds that corn-based ethanol will qualify. And I said the Treasury Department, and I'm correct. Why the Treasury Department? Because, Damian, it's a tax incentive. So that's who makes the decision. The Treasury Department has to make that decision. How it continues as a program depends on this upcoming election, because if Trump were the next president, he's going to get at those tax incentives for electric vehicles. He doesn't like them. Yeah. So he's going to try to reduce them. Now, his people tell me, but not Trump has not mentioned this, it's too direct right now for the president, that he will continue support for biofuels. That's a question mark. And the biggest question I get in from CEOs of agribusiness and energy companies is this topic. Will a Trump administration keep support for biofuels? And there's your biggest question if he's the next president.
And you think yes, because that's
I think yes.
The track record.
I want to see, but it's bipartisan support in Congress, so there's a lot of things going for it. And like I said, if corn carryover gets to lofty levels, just think if we ever had anywhere close to a normal weather year for corn. Just look at the production capability of this corn crop. And so that's that's what we're looking at right now, well above trend line yields if that was the case. So you need biofuels policy, and it's good for domestic energy, and it's good for the agribusiness. And this is why the oil companies now, rather than being an opponent to agriculture, they're joining forces in a number of cases with the biofuel industry because they don't want the electric vehicles going on. So they're investing in some of these biofuel industries. So I think you're seeing really some strange bedfellows get together here.
Ethanol was opposed 20 years ago by the Exxons or the Chevrons or the Shell Oils vehemently. And I told my ag crowd 15, 20 years ago, I said, you think a bunch of corn farmers in Nebraska are going to win against Exxon? I mean, I'm not being mean, I'm being frank. They own political policy. Well, it turns out as things have evolved that now, like you said, they're hopping in on this game because they'd rather be in on the ethanol game than out on the electric battery euphoric bullshit about, I don't know, we're going to save the world by going to third world countries and knocking down mountains to mine nickel and cadmium. Anyway, what about other policy then? You don't think anything's going to happen in 2024 substantive, but you and I both think if we get to fall and things are as dire as everybody's wringing their hands about right now, I think they hit the ATM. You do too, right?
Eventually, if it gets bad enough, they'll be creative, that would be the word, and tap the ATM, and then Congress will replenish the Commodity Credit Corporation funding. But you can't count on that. It's still an administrative decision. that they would have to do. But the pressure, Damian, if you start getting throughout farm country, if you were to get, again, those corn prices under 4 futures, soybeans under 11, then it filters throughout the whole agribusiness sector, at the grain elevator, at the co-op system, at the input companies. So that's where the pressure builds on not only the White House and the administration, but both political parties in Congress.
Yeah, they'll feel the pinch for sure. And like I said, right now things are not as dire. Well, we're not at sub 4, we're not at sub 11, we're at 460 and 1190 or something, right? On the prices that we're talking about. What about the environmental thing? Besides biofuels, this administration has, the whole infrastructure, which is really the Inflation Creation Act, and it became a Green Act. That policy persists if this administration, whether it's the senile puppet or whoever they install in his place,
Here's perspective. If Biden or another Democrat wins the White House, I'm still not sure Biden is going to be the candidate, but let's just assume a Democrat wins the White House again. I will guarantee you more regulations from the administration that will be negative for U.S. agriculture, especially in the pesticide area. You're already seeing it.
Dicamba, pesticides, dicamba in particular. And then, some of it might be incentive laden, like we'll pay you to make these changes, but I'm afraid some of it's not carrot and it's stick. And that's what concerns me. So I hear concerns on both sides of it. Trust me, I hear you with the Trump thing and I hear you with this current thing. I think that if they have a second term, whoever the actual person in charge is, and you and I both wonder about that, it's going to be even doubling down on environmental stuff, and ag has a huge bullseye on its back.
Absolutely. And what EPA last year, I think, got a 24% increase in funding. What do you think a regulatory agency does with a 24% increase in funding?
They hire people. Well, they hire more
people and they regulate more. Absolutely.
Yeah. By the way, that's a big concern. They've been terming it a whole of government approach. That's the administration now. And what that really means is when we don't have a Senate or a House that will vote with us, we just go around the back door and use a regulatory agency. So whole of government means creating non-elected entities like EPA to then target IRS, to then target us. And that's what concerns me the hell about this current administration. Whole of government means all of our forces deployed into agencies that then can impact the private sector like us.
It's scary, and via the use of executive orders now that we've seen from Obama on. Obama used them, Trump used them, and Biden is really putting them in hyperdrive in his use of executive orders. Yeah, it's scary. The one real good thing I think that Trump did during his administration was on regulations. He reduced them. And remember when he said for every new regulation, he wants to see 2 or 3 go away. And that really played out throughout the U.S. based on my talks. You have to remember this. Some regulations are needed. I always see that when I travel overseas, where we've got some regulations that protect U.S. consumers. However, most regulations are unfunded mandates, and they're taxes on the American public. And perversely, the Democrats usually say they favor the small to medium-sized producers. No. Regulations tend to hurt those size producers the most, because a larger operation can usually, although they don't like it, they can deal with the situation. Not only on that, but you have policy at the state level that farmers have to worry about. Look at Minnesota. That's all I'll have to say. And Minnesota listeners will know what I'm talking about.
So what's interesting is what you just said. Small banks get almost regulated out of business. The big 4 banks essentially are essentially de facto government. It's government banking because they're so large that they just then say, okay, pass these regulations, we'll comply because we can afford it. And then we just basically the cost of regulation runs these small operators out of business. You just compare that to agriculture. Now, here's the thing. Regulation, yes, but USDA policy, and a lot of people don't like when I say this, has generally favored or even propped up or kept in business smaller, less efficient agricultural operations.
Yeah, the one key word when you describe the Biden administration right now, it's equity. It's really income redistribution. There's no other way around it. I'm trying to be as fair as I possibly can. You see it. You saw it in the changes that Vilsack made in the ERP program, the disaster program, which was a disaster in itself. The way they implemented it. What I just said, it's not based on production agriculture. No. It's based on really the inefficient, smaller, not that they don't need help, but it's just a major fundamental change. And on the regulatory side, if Biden is not the candidate, but Gavin Newsom is a possibility from California. I want to tell you a real quick story. I was just there in Palm Springs at the old Riviera Hotel, and I think it's called Margaritaville. And I was in building number 2. And I still have a bad leg. You know, it's coming along, but I need an elevator. And I looked around, and there was no elevator in the building. And I said, "Am I in California, the regulatory state? I mean, where's Gavin Newsom's regulations when you need it?" Yeah. I also, by the way, every time I'm in California at a breakfast buffet, I eat as much bacon as I possibly can because they were the instigators of Proposition 12. And pork prices are really high in California because they're suffering through the negative consequences of trying to dictate to the U.S. pork industry.
So, by the way, did you find an elevator or did you just get somebody to carry you up the stairs?
I carried it up.
So what you're talking about here is the regulatory environment, like I said, and a lot of people don't like it. You know, the guy that farms my ground's a large-scale dairy operation. When they threw some money at dairy a couple of years ago because of milk prices, they capped out. And, you know, he says, well, no offense, but the amount of money that I can get capped out at wouldn't pay my payroll around here for a month. And, you know, compared to if you were a smaller scale dairy farmer, like you're still doing things like it was 1975, the amount you got essentially just set you up for that year. I mean, that was your net profit for the year. So generally, USDA policy has favored smaller or even less efficient, and that might continue. But you're talking about the regulatory environment. I see it being bad if the current administration has a second term. Whatever puppet they instill next, because I think that then it's like, okay, we got through the first term. I think the regulatory state ramps up. I'm talking like what I see in Europe, and that scares me.
You're absolutely 100% correct. And another side point is you followed recently where the Republicans tried to impeach Mayorkas, the Homeland Security guy. I thought that was a silly approach because even if you impeached him, and it never would have gone in the Senate anyway, but let's say it would have, his replacement, you think he wouldn't continue the policy? The immigration policy or the lack thereof of the Biden administration. Right. So, you know, what you just said on EPA is right. It would continue, even though an laughable thing, the EPA is an independent agency. You ought to laugh at that one. Yeah. They would continue the regulatory thrust of the Biden administration, which is to regulate.
So get me out of here. Big takeaways on the farm policy. And here we are recording the second week of February, 2024. Big takeaways, your thoughts. And we all know it's point in time kind of stuff. We talked about election, we talked about regulation, talked about the growth of the whole of government approach, which means creating IRS, USDA, name the acronym that gets more money. Talked about some real numbers on the financials for the farm, and you and I both kind of agree that we're not going to see a big washout because there'll probably be intervention. And I'm not being, I'm not like telling the poor kid, hey, you're not really injured. I'm just saying I don't think you're that injured yet, and I think you're probably going to be okay. Your thoughts?
Yeah. One, if you're going to have a farm bill this year, we're going to know by May of this year. So let that be your timeline. Two, prices. Every Outlook conference that I go to, and I give about 40 speeches a year, the analysts have been very negative, and I know you hear it too, Damian, for both corn and soybeans outlook, especially corn. But three, although interest rates have been rising, in 2025, your financing in the ag sector, they're going to go lower. So that'll help in the financing end. And usually with lower prices brings a boost in demand, both domestically and internationally. So eventually you eat your way out of a surplus problem. So don't give up. This too shall pass. We're uncertain whether it'll be a one-year downturn or a multiple-year downturn. We just don't know the evidence yet. And fourth, this upcoming election is very key because who gets in the White House, and if it's either political party running the whole gambit, White House, House, and Senate, that's where you can get some major changes. That's how we got the tax cuts for Trump in 2017. That's how we got the Inflation Reduction Act, the climate bill, if you will, from Biden. So watch those as your parameters, but don't get too down in farm country. As you said, there's been a lot of income built up. Yeah. Yes, a downturn's coming. You just have to farm and market profitable. Remember, you can never go bankrupt making money. So sell some products.
And you're not going to say that there's a big net positive to either outcome come November, because I don't know that, like you said, there's pluses and minuses to both potential outcomes.
Yeah, we need to see the players involved. We really need to see the player and who controls the chambers.
Yeah,
because again, you'll just have a status quo if you have a split. Yeah. So it remains to be seen. Yeah,
and the status quo may not be bad. 21, 22, and 23. Highest 3 years of farm income ever. So let's not bitch too much about what that status quo. We don't like the regulation. We don't like EPA growing, but we also made money.
Yeah, we need to see the U.S. and world economy tick up. The world GDP, gross domestic product, is just a little over 3%. You really need it at 4.5% or 5% or even higher to really have the hope for a demand pull markets and trade, the ability to buy U.S. foreign products. So use that as another barometer. Domestically, we were at 3% for GDP for calendar year 2023. Not bad, but it looks like we could be going into a minor downturn. I'm not going to get into the recession debate. It still feels like one to many people. But once we get the economy turned around again, once we get the liquidity going again, the ag sector is still a growth industry for the decades ahead.
I like it. By the way, if you're wondering about those numbers, the United States GDP is usually not in that 4.5% to 5% because it's hard for a mature economy as big as ours to grow by that much. So the bigger percentage growth usually happens in the ascending economies, and that's what Jim's point was. And that's who tends to be our customers, like Mexico, which I think is a absolute, whoever gets in office, I hope we don't mess up Mexico as a customer. As I point out all the time, we need to figure out the immigration thing, but it's not Mexicans that are coming across the border. Mexicans are staying in Mexico. They're transporting them, but that's the conduit, but they're not. Mexico's become a huge customer for us. Number two.
Absolutely. Those are the takeaways.
I like your takeaways. His name is Jim Wiesemeyer, policy analyst, pro farmer, Farm Journal. You can listen to him on with Chip Flory when they do Agri-Talk. You can see his stuff online. He's in Fargo if you happen to be in Fargo. He's all over the place. He's on stages across America. Anyway, he's awesome.
Fargo in February builds character.
Trust me, and I was there last month, so I got it. Anyway, he's awesome. I appreciate him being on here. Thanks a lot, buddy. Sure. All right, till next time, thanks for being here. Check out all these past episodes, and you know what? Really good stuff. 330 plus episodes of the Business of Agriculture. Go check it out. Share it with your friends. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, please. It doesn't cost anything. We want to get more people watching as well as listening. Share this wherever you get your podcast. Till next time, I'm Damian Mason, and this is the Business of Agriculture. Well, that concludes another fantastic episode of the Business of Agriculture. This episode was brought to you by Pattern Ag. You know, everybody in agriculture understands the importance of soil health. We also keep an eye on our soil better than we ever did through advanced soil testing. But what if there was a company that provided predictive analytics, not just checking out nutrients and all the elements that are in there, but also could tell you the degree of risk you face with disease and pest pressure? That's right. Pattern Ag can do that. They actually can tell you, hey, you're going to have a real issue here. You can preemptively, proactively treat for corn rootworm or cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome before the problem actually starts costing you yield. Go to pattern.ag, that's www.pattern.ag, to find the nearest rep that can help you start doing better for your soil.